So you may have all kinds of powers of attorney out there, customs brokers acting on your behalf that you don't even know about. And some of those could be filing anti-dumping entries that you don't.
Welcome to Simply Trade, brought to you by Global Training Center. My name is Lalo, and together with my co-host Andy, we have well over 60 years of combined trade, logistics, and supply chain experience. Along the way, we have seen and witnessed different challenges in trade compliance. We decided to put this show together and call on our friends and colleagues in the business to hang out with us and share their knowledge in all things trade. Thank you for spending some time with us. Enjoy the show. Hey, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for this second part of the talk that we had with Bonnie Kersch. Just as a reminder, if you are listening to this and have not heard the first part, I encourage you to please just go back and listen to that first part, as this is a continuation of that discussion that we were having with Bonnie. And we pick up here from where we left off. In the interest of time, we decided to split the show up into two parts. Before we go on, also, I want to remind everyone something very important and ask you to please rate and comment on our show wherever you listen to this podcast, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, one of those services. And we would really appreciate you doing that. So please do that before the end of the show. Thank you very much. And let's pick up again on the conversation with Bonnie regarding anti-dumping and countervailing duties.
Well, let me ask this, Bonnie, what would be, so we've talked about, again, vetting the suppliers, vetting the commodity itself, doing research in that. Mm-hmm. At some point, looking at employing an expert at some point. Are there? I'm sure there's some other steps in here that we probably need to cover, don't you think?
I think one of the things I would cover is partnering with your broker as well, mm-hmm. because when a shipment comes in. So I've seen this happen, in past worlds, past clients or whatnot, where you have two sets of brokers. You either have a broker who every time they get a shipment on your behalf that flags for possible anti-dumping or countervailing duties, they'll shoot you an email and say, hey, I saw that this flags. Can you let me know whether it's in scope of the ruling or out of scope of the ruling, so I know whether I need to pay the duties on your behalf or not? That is the great relationship that you want to have with your broker, that they come to you and they ask you. I've also seen the flip side happen, where a broker, every time a shipment flags for anti-dumping, they claim it and they pay it, whether it qualifies for or not. And they never even check in with the importer to find out. So I've seen companies who are paying, $50,000 a month in anti-dumping duties and didn't even know they had any anti-dumping happening. And come to find out, their products didn't even qualify for anti-dumping. They didn't fall under the scope of the ruling, but the broker was just claiming it every time it flagged. So I think that having that relationship with your broker and putting that on your SOPs with them, what's expected of them, that if something flags for anti-dumping, they need to let you know as the importer. They need to come to you and have that conversation.
Well, that would be,
instead
to your
of just
point,
assuming.
Two things. One, the relationship between an importer and a customs broker is more than your average, than a regular, company vendor type relationship. A mm-hmm. customs broker with a company is more of a, using the term like an intimate business relationship, where they have to really,
a partner.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
They have to know what you're striving to accomplish, and at the same time, mm-hmm. They're working on your behalf. So it's like, that relationship, as you just mentioned, is like, hey, I need you. You're my eyes in the port, if you will. You need to raise a flag if there's a concern there. That's one thing. Right. The other is everyone should be doing at least a quarterly broker review. Some call it business review in general. I get that, but even a quarterly broker review, and you're going through and looking at, well, how many formals, informals, how many O3 entries did you do? How many entries mm-hmm. required any kind of permits mm-hmm. or licenses? Let's look at that and go through and make sure that's where it's going to come up. things are going to happen. I see that. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, we claimed it and
Sure.
shouldn't have. Okay. But to that extent, again, we've been talking a lot about somewhat preventative type measures or being proactive. Most compliance in the last, you know, couple of decades have been very reactionary, and things have gotten better
Mm-hmm.
probably in the last 5 years in a sense of becoming more proactive. But let's take the reactive situation. Didn't have any control over it. Item comes in, and you have one of those moments, and like, who
Uh-huh.
authorized this to come in? You know, whatever. What do you
Right.
do with that kind of scenario there where you're finding out and going, oops?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, typically, if your broker is contacting you and saying, "Hey, we've seen this good come in and it's flagged for anti-dumping," I mean, if it really does qualify for anti-dumping, it's kind of too late at that point. You just need to pay the anti-dumping, and at least for that
Mm-hmm.
one, shipment, pretty hard to say no, I don't want it anymore and turn it around at that point,
Mm-hmm.
right? But yeah, I mean, I would have that conversation, like where in the process did, if my intent was to not have anything, not purchase anything that
Mm-hmm.
qualifies for anti-dumping, where in the process did that break down? And there, maybe the vendor told you initially that their country of origin was Canada, and come to find out, they abbreviated CN, didn't mean Canada, it meant
Mm-hmm.
China, right? So
Mm-hmm.
those conversations need to happen so that it doesn't happen again. But you're right, having that relationship with your broker, that as a good business partner, and reviewing that on at least a quarterly basis, like
Mm-hmm.
you said. I would say monthly is probably more appropriate for most situations. But reviewing anti-dumping entries, and how many did we have, and did they really qualify? Was I really supposed to pay those duties? And is this the way that we want to continue to run our business? Do we want to continue to pay these anti-dumping duties? And like we talked about at the beginning, do we have a choice? Is this the only vendor or the only, country of origin we can get? Or
Mm-hmm.
is there another way to circumvent this in the supply chain
A-
process?
And
Go
So,
what
ahead.
about
yeah.
Bonnie? Okay, so it came in, you paid the anti-dumping. Later, you find out it wasn't subject to anti-dumping. I mean, are we going to do a drawback, or is there any other way to get that money back?
I would think that you would file like a post summary correction, if it hasn't been liquidated yet, or if it's within the time for that, or a protest. I would think you could get that back that way. But once you've paid money, it's a lot easier to say, "Oh, I didn't pay money that I should have paid," and give more money, than it is to say, "Oh, I paid money that I shouldn't have," and to get it
Right.
back, right? So I haven't been through that process, Lalo, but I would think that there would be a lot of paperwork to prove that it didn't
Well, and
qualify
not
for
only that,
And
the
anti-dumping.
issue, even when you go through and get the approvals for in what you're filing to request the refund, it can sometimes take up to a year before
Hmm.
the government will cut you a check, and it's like
right.
one
Yeah.
issue that.
Yeah, it's
So
going to
it's
take a
it's
while,
you're taking
for
a
sure.
hit on your cash flow because we're talking significant duties,
Hmm.
and when you're bringing
Yeah.
in large things like this, so it's this is one where it would be wise again. Let's One of the shows that we've done is how to gain support from the C-suite, and part of the discussion
Hmm.
was as a compliance related person, you need to have alliances with the transportation logistics, the sourcing or purchasing folks, and the different areas of legal and IT and all of those things,
Yeah,
so that
everyone.
as you're
Yeah.
going through, one of the things I would tell you, I have heard companies will form and on a regular basis hold meetings of a logistics council or a trade international trade council or whatever they want to
Hmm.
call it.
Hmm.
And it would be paramount to make sure that when you walk in, that's not the first time all your counterparts in that committee have seen you. You need to have networking ahead of
Absolutely.
time. So this is a great example of how
Hmm.
to, again, pull that together and gain support. Let me take it a step further. So you have the AD/CVDs entries and the brokers dealing with that. What about record retention now? Because it's like all bets are off. Some of these cases take years to resolve. And so, what is there anything in particular that you have done that to keep track of those kinds of things? That maybe here's one that's 7 years old or 5 years old or whatever the case is.
Hmm. I mean, in the US, the typical record retention policy is
Mm-hmm.
5 years, right? It's a little bit longer in Canada. If we have any, Canadian listeners, it's 6 years plus the
Right.
current year, right? So, that's pretty typical. But you also typically want to maintain records for any entries that haven't
Mm-hmm.
liquidated yet, and that would include like an open anti-dumping case, right? It may not have liquidated yet. So you can run reports in ACE, the
There we go.
customs platform, to see your
Right.
unliquidated entries. And so if you find a report in ACE that shows unliquidated entries, you want to make sure you maintain those entries, those records until they liquidate, at least until they
Okay.
liquidate.
Well,
So something
all
to
right.
keep in
So
mind as
going
well.
back through, we've talked about being proactive, vetting the suppliers, and looking at for several different things, not just an AD or CVD, but all the different
Hmm.
issues that would come up. So vetting your
Sure.
suppliers, vetting the commodity itself, being involved with everything from the classification to the research. So that's the third thing. Then reaching out to appropriate experts to confirm what your assessment is, or get more information on it. Again,
Sure.
doing your broker reviews and having the instructions
Hmm.
with your broker. So that I kind of put that all in one, is like your relationship with your broker and doing broker reviews of your entries. And the last thing that you brought up there
Hmm.
was running the reports in ACE so you don't get caught flat-footed. ACE is, and I'm talking it from a U.S. perspective, and then like you just mentioned, Canada or any other country that's keeping up with this, is you need to find out if you're listed as the importer of record under your EIN number, what is it that the government
Hmm.
is looking at? And that's what those reports are. Case in point, what you just
Right.
mentioned on ACE, right? Okay.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, running regular entry summary reports is super important to understand. First of all, going back to talking about the brokers and having reviews with them, do you really know all of the brokers that are acting on your behalf? You
Right.
may think you do, but are there brokers out there who are actually clearing goods on your behalf that you're not even aware of? Sometimes someone in your customer service department might get sent a shipper's letter of instruction and just sign the bottom of it with good intention to get the shipping movement, but they don't realize that, at the bottom of that SLI is a power of attorney granting the broker the right to clear on your behalf. So you may have all kinds of powers of attorney out there, customs brokers acting on your behalf that you don't even know about. And some of those could be filing anti-dumping entries that you don't know about. So definitely keeping a track of your data is super important.
Well, and to that point, that's a great situation there when you run those reports and you see there are brokers tendering entries for you. In that, if your company has those logistics committees or international trade committees, that's a great example to bring back out and say, hey guys, this is, I don't know if you knew this or not, this is not really an approved broker. Somebody signed off, they tendered the entry,
Right.
satisfied the immediate, but now there's, as I would say now, I'm being a pooper scooper at the end of a parade here. It's like I got to clean up
Right.
this mess, and I didn't create it, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You have to clean
Right.
up the
We
mess.
we had a
I
client.
know.
Oh, go
So
ahead.
then you have
No,
the
I was going to say we had a client.
well, I was going to say, and then you have,
No, no, go
then,
go ahead. Go
sorry,
ahead.
we're
Go ahead.
talking over each other. I was going to say, then you have the issue of trying to figure out how that
Right.
happened
Right.
in the first
Right.
place, right, Andy? So who is issuing those powers of attorney? Who's signing those SLIs? And maybe that's just a matter of additional training, and like you said, building those relationships. If people, and building those relationships is so important that it doesn't just mean you show up to a meeting every now and then and say, hey, I'm Andy, the trade
Yeah.
compliance guy, or, something like that. It means like, go to
Right.
dinner with these people, right? Grab a Coke with them,
Right.
get a coffee, something like that, and really
Right.
form those
Exactly.
relationships so that when these things come up in their daily course of business, they think, oh, yeah, I remember that guy, Andy. Like, I should give him a call. He was a
Right.
nice guy, right? I want to talk to him. So that's how you get buy
You
in,
want to be a
in
resource for
Right.
the
people, not like
organization.
a
Right.
man.
Lala, what do you?
Lila, what were you
Right.
going to say?
No, well, what I was going to
Well,
say
you don't.
is,
Yeah.
coincidentally enough, Bonnie helped with a client a few years ago. They had a trade summit, if you remember, Bonnie, that they gathered the heads of all departments. They did it, and they pretty much, it was called a trade summit. It's an internal company trade summit. They trained the engineering, purchasing, and then y'all had a bunch of little mini topics, like a little mini conference within the corporation. And they just went through and,
Right.
that's how they're make them aware of stuff like this.
Yeah, it's really important to have that awareness of all, topics trade compliance related. I think most companies are really good at saying, okay, we comply with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or, we're not selling Russian goods, or, those sorts of things. But what about, how does trade compliance affect pricing? Or how does trade compliance affect you might have an issue where you have a deemed export situation where you have something that's licensable, and
Right.
certain people from who are Chinese nationals who work for your company aren't allowed in that part of your warehouse or your laboratory, right? So trade compliance really affects everything from HR to legal to any part of the business that you can think of. So really building those relationships, like Andy and Lalo, both of you were talking about, is really just important.
Well, I tell you what,
So
I think this has been good. We could probably keep on going on all kinds of things, but here's the
good.
thing that what we're talking about today would be considered a bit more of an advanced topic for compliance people. And if anybody is new to the compliance arena, they need to be looking at building a foundation of solid knowledge and skill development before you start taking on this kind of a item. And if you are thrust into a situation like this where you need to deal with an anti-dumping or CVD case, it would be highly suggested that you get some expert help, but then get yourself into some training programs to get yourself up to speed.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's when you call Lalo, right? That's when you call Lalo and you say, Lalo, I'm new here. I need some training. Help me out. Yeah, and he
Yeah.
can definitely,
Yeah,
do that
he
in a
keeps looking
heartbeat.
at me. I'm
Yeah, that's
dumb
who
as a
I would
box
reach
of
out
rocks.
to.
He goes, Andy, you got to get
Oh,
through these
hush.
things. I'm telling you.
Yeah, right. All right. Yeah,
Oh,
right.
we all know
And
that's
on
not
that
true.
note,
Yeah.
thank
But
you, though. I mean,
yeah.
it's like we're now again running out of time. Thank you very much. I
Okay.
mean, I don't know, any final words, Bonnie, or
I think just, for someone who is new to trade compliance, I think it can be very daunting to be thrown into that role because there is just so much to do and so much to learn and so many topics. So I would really, some advice I would give someone, in that situation is to just take it
right?
piece by piece, right? Take a deep breath. Don't bite off more than you can chew. If you're tasked with handling anti-dumping right away, I would go to the Department of Commerce website and start reading. There's also a really good, not to plug Netflix, but there's a super good Netflix episode on anti-dumping. So it's the TV show. It's called
Oh yeah.
Rotten.
Hmm.
Rotten, Rotten, and it's in season 1. I forget which episode, but it's an episode about the avocado case that I talked about earlier. But it's really good episode. They interview the farmers, they interview the Chinese producers as well, and they go through the whole situation. And Netflix is so good at producing these things, so it's actually pretty interesting and not as
Yeah.
dry as
We
I'm making
will
it out to
we
be.
will
But
highlight
I
that
think that's a
then
good place to start.
find the source so that we're in the
Yeah,
show notes. We'll list that in. That's
Yeah.
excellent.
Speaking
So
of
yeah,
Netflix, real quick,
I think
they
it's
also
good.
did a really good point of showing what. Does anybody see Ozark on Netflix? This last.
Yeah, I feel like I can
I
launder
know
money
this
now.
last
I
season
probably
they
can't, but
they covered a lot on what is it, SDN? Is that what it is? Uh, it's like,
they
what
did.
is
Yeah, they were
SDN? What
trying
is
to
it?
get
Yeah.
someone off of the
I,
denied
I
parties
It
I'm
was
list,
like I'm.
basically. Yeah.
What'd they
oh they
cover? I'm
spent
sorry.
They were trying to bring in someone. I'm trying to remember exactly, but basically they were laundering money for the Mexican drug cartel, and they wanted to get somebody off of the designated nationals list, like basically off of the denied parties list. And so they covered that a lot in this just mainstream TV show. So it was kind of,
Wow.
I think for
yeah,
people like
for
us,
like,
it was kind of a
yeah,
geeky, like, hey, I know about
for
that.
like
That's
3
what
or
I
4
do.
episodes. In fact, I mean, it was like, wow, okay.
Yeah,
Good night.
I know.
Anyway,
Yeah.
okay, so
All right.
thank you. And yeah,
Yeah, always happy to
well,
talk
we're
to you
gonna have you
guys.
back.
We
I mean,
can,
there's no doubt.
yeah,
We're
anytime.
definitely, hopefully, we can carve out some time in your schedule here in the future. But we definitely we're gonna have you back. We love talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.